The low summer sun cast a muted glow across the rolling plains as Eleonora Wren pressed against the weathered wheel of the battered Connolly wagon. Each creak of wood beneath her fingertips was a reminder of how far she'd come and how far she had yet to go. Within her, life stirred, a small unspoken promise that beat in rhythm with her own pounding heart. The journey east had promised safety, a new life with a husband she'd never met beyond the parchment of a mail-order contract. But on the frontier, promises were as fragile as dry prairie grass. Eleonora closed her eyes and inhaled the acrid scent of sun-baked dirt and manure. She could feel the weight of her belly, a constant reminder that beneath her cotton dress, new blood pulsed toward the dawn. She shouldn't have come alone, but there had been no other way. Her father's farm in Illinois had been sold under a cloud of debt, and her mother's cough had grown so harsh that each night felt like a borrowed breath slipping away. She had traded her safety for the slimmest chance at survival. A distant crack of thunder sounded though the sky remained clear. She frowned, pressing a hand to her temple. The wind shifted, stirring the tall grass into ghostly waves. There was an unsettling quiet, as if the prairie itself was holding its breath. Leaning forward, she peered beyond the wagon, scanning the horizon. No dark shapes, no billowing dust, just the empty expanse that stretched past her own shifting thoughts. She winced as the wagon lurched against a hidden rock. Beside her, Samuel Connolly shouted to the oxen, his voice cracking with fever and fatigue. Eleonora hadn't seen a doctor in weeks. The Connolly farm's spring well had gone dry, forcing them onto the road. Samuel's wife had died giving birth last autumn, and now the widower pressed on with his last kin, promising them a sanctuary in Nebraska territory. Eleonora cradled her belly. Could she call this sanctuary? The horizon offered no shelter. The sun had pressed her to the edge of hope, leaving her with the relentless ache of uncertainty. Minutes later, the sharp report of a rifle echoed, then another. Her heart seized. She bolted upright, blood plunging toward her skull. Through the thin canvas, she saw the telltale flash, a plume of smoke that shouldn't have been there. Bandits, an ambush. The Connolly wagon team cried out as bullets whistled through the cloth. Eleonora bolted from her seat, hands shaking as she drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders. In a rush, men leapt from the other wagons. Women screamed. Oxen broke loose, charging. The first thief, a lean-haired man with a fierce grin raised his pistol toward Samuel, who lay across the tongue of the wagon, shoring up a crate against the onslaught. The thief's arm glinted in the sun. Eleonora's breath caught. Her protector, a stranger in this foreign world, was about to die. Her mind whirled. She could do nothing. She froze, legs trembling like saplings in a gale. She thought of her unborn. Child of the lullabies, she longed to sing beneath a safer sky. But the world unraveled faster than she could dream. A flash of movement impossible, too swift for human eyes, cut through the chaos. A figure bolted from the thicket like a summoned shadow. He moved with uncanny grace, bowstring drawn taut. In his weathered hands, his arrow sang through the air, finding its mark in the bandit's chest. The man's grin dissolved into shock as he collapsed behind a tattered blanket. Eleonora blinked, breath catching in her throat. The Lakota warrior stepped forward, bow now lowered, eyes shadowed beneath his feathered hair. His skin was bronzed by the sun, his war paint smeared in swift strokes across his high cheekbones. He exuded a fierce calm, like a hawk perched on a wind-blown branch. He had saved her life. Her husband, whom she had never met, could never have arrived like this. The second thief reeled and raised his pistol, but the warrior's hand was a blur. A sleek knife flashed, its blade sinking into the bandit's side. The man bit off a scream and tumbled into dust. The prairie swallowed him. Eleonora felt the ground shift beneath her gravity of fear and awe. This man, this stranger who fought like a storm, claimed her life as if she were his own. No one dared cross him. The remaining thieves exchanged glances and fled, yelping curses into the wind. Silence stifled the prairie once more. The Lakota warrior sheathed his blade and approached the caravan. Eleonora stepped forward, drawn by a force she could not name. She saw in his dark eyes the flicker of ancient fires and the river's patient resolve. He knelt before her, voice low and resonant. "You are safe now." His accent carried the earth's cadence. She swallowed. "Thank you. Another." Crack of thunder split the sky. She stumbled but caught herself. Pain bloomed across her side where she'd been brushed by a stray bullet. Lightheaded, she sank to one knee. The warrior's brows knit with concern. He laid a gentle hand on her back. Beneath his touch, the ache within her softened, as if the land itself lent its strength. He spoke her name, surprising her. "Eleonora." Tremor ran through her. How did he know? She looked at him, heart hammering. He drew a small leather pouch from his belt and pressed it into her palm. "Medicine for the child," he said. "My name is Haya, son of the wind." Breath left. Her lungs. The weight of her hope and her fear pressed against her chest. She glanced at the broken wagon, at Samuel clutching his side, at the blood-soaked ground. She gripped the pouch as Haya stood. A distant rumble warned of another storm closing in, or perhaps of fate's inexorable march. She met his steady gaze and realized there would be no turning back. A new life awaited one, forged from fire and fear, bound by survival and an unexpected bond. She rose, leaning on the cannon of dawn that would break across the plains, and followed him into the uncertain twilight. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." Under the endless stretch of twilight, Eleonora Wren felt every mile of the trail etched into her bones. She could still taste the dust of the ambush that left her stranded, alone but for the life she carried. A woman without kin, without a husband, with only a name signed on a mail-order promise and a wagon wheel mired in red clay. But it was not the vastness of the land that haunted her. It was the certainty that eyes watched from the edges of the cottonwoods, from the shadows of the ridgeline. She'd heard stories around campfires, whispers of painted horsemen who moved with the wind. Raiders, some said. Protectors, said others. She had no way to know which legend would claim her. Her hand rested on the small of her belly as she crouched, to gather what little firewood the sparse plain offered. The baby moved just a flutter, but it felt like a signal, a plea to keep going. She spoke softly, words meant for tiny ears not yet ready for the world. "We'll find a place," she promised, "somewhere they can't take from us." A dry twig snapped behind her. She froze, heart hammering so loud she feared the sound would betray her. Slowly, she rose, fingers brushing the small blade she kept tucked at her waist. She turned, and the sight that met her eyes robbed her of breath. He sat atop a painted pony, body straight as an arrow shaft, black hair falling loose around a face carved from stone. A Lakota warrior, she knew it even before the wind caught the eagle feather woven into his braid. He watched her, silent, eyes like the deep pools that gathered at dusk reflecting but giving nothing away. For a heartbeat, they were the only two people on the vast plain. Then he swung down from his horse in a single fluid motion, boots sinking into the soft clay dot. She wanted to run, to fight, to beg. But she could do none of those things, rooted as she was by the weariness in her bones and the quiet certainty that he'd outrun any desperation she could muster. His eyes dropped to her belly. He said nothing, only lifted his gaze to hers again, as if weighing her soul on scales older than any law. She found her voice, a trembling reed of sound. "Please, I have nothing left for you to take." Still, he said nothing. Instead, he stepped forward and crouched where she had been gathering kindling, placing his hand flat against the earth. His other hand traced a line in the dirt, a symbol she did not know but felt the meaning of all the same: protection, shelter, claim. When he rose again, he spoke at last a single word, deep and resonant in a tongue she didn't know. And then, softer, in halting English, "Wife," the word lodged in her throat. "No, I am already promised. Her hand went to her ring finger, but the brass band had long ago slipped off during the river crossing that stole her last shred of security. He gestured to the broken wagon in the distance, the plundered trunks, the missing horses. He spoke. Again the same word, wife. And in that moment, Eleonora understood two truths that would shape the rest of her life. First, she would not die on this stretch of prairie. Second, she would not leave it as the same woman who had arrived with her dreams pinned to a man who would never come. She straightened, chin trembling but high. "And if I refuse?" His eyes flicked to her belly again, then back to her face. He said nothing, but the wind seemed to carry his reply. "What choice do you have?" A choice all the same, she thought fiercely. The only one that mattered now. She closed her eyes, felt the baby shift inside her. She felt the raw edge of fear soften, just a hair beneath the weight of something else. Resolve, hope, maybe. Or something like it. When she opened her eyes, he was still there, a shape of shadow and promise against the sinking sun. She whispered the word back to him, tasting it like a question that was already an answer. "Wife," he nodded once, then reached out a hand. She hesitated, then took it. And so began a journey neither could have foreseen. Lakota warrior and the mail order bride whose road had ended in blood, but might yet begin anew. This is only the beginning. The darkness gathered around them, but for the first time in days, Eleonora Wren did not feel alone. The next 25,000 plus characters continue with their journey deeper into his camp, her awakening to a world of traditions and dangers, the conflict brewing between his people and the settlers, and her battle within between fear and trust, grief and the fragile bloom of new belonging. Every line deepens her resolve, the stakes and the storm gathering around them both, ending with a cliffhanger that leaves Eleonora face to face with the ghost of the man she was once promised to alive, and bent on reclaiming what he believes is his. Dawn came with the hush of wind through the cottonwoods and the distant cry of a hawk. Eleonora Wren woke to the rough texture of a buffalo hide beneath her cheek and the distant thrum of a drumbeat echoing up from the heart of the Lakota camp. Her belly ached with the weight of her child, a reminder that every breath now counted double. She rose slowly, wincing as her joints protested. The night had been long. She'd lain in the circle of her new husband's people, half hidden beneath a robe he'd draped around her shoulders. No words had passed between them after that single vow beneath the dusk sky. Yet every movement, every glance, spoke louder than anything her old life had ever known. Around her, the camp came to life. Children chased each other between the lodge poles. Old women stirred stewpots over crackling fires. The air smelled of smoke and earth and something older, a memory rising from the land itself. She found him standing at the edge of the clearing, speaking to a circle of men whose faces were painted in shades of earth and ash. He was different. Here where the night before he had been a lone shadow on the plains, now he was a leader among equals, his words carrying weight that made the others lean in. When his eyes found her, the conversation halted. Silence fell like a blanket. He beckoned her forward with the tilt of his chin. She went, every step echoing in her chest. When she reached him, he placed a hand on her shoulder, light, yet firm. The gesture said what his words did not. She was under his protection now. His wife. The men murmured something she couldn't catch, their eyes flicking to her belly, then back to him. A few nodded. One did not. He was older, his hair braided with the fur of a gray fox, eyes sharp as flint. His words came in a low growl. And though she did not understand the tongue, the tone was clear enough, a challenge. Her husband answered without looking away from the old man. One word stone cold. The old man's lips curled. He spat into the dust at Eleonora's feet. She flinched. Instinct told her to step back, to shrink, but the hand on her shoulder kept her rooted. He turned her gently but firmly, guiding her away from the circle of men. As they walked, he spoke for the first time since claiming her. He says you are bad luck, a burden. His voice was low, rough with an accent that rolled her name into something softer. She tasted the insult like bile. What do you say? She asked. They paused at the edge of the camp, near a stand of wind-twisted pines. He touched her belly, then pressed his palm flat over her heart. I say. He searched for the word, then found it with a faint half-smile that did not reach his eyes. Strong. A laugh, thin and brittle, broke from her lips. Strong? I'm half-starved, sick half the time, and I can't even keep a wagon wheel from splitting in two. I'm hardly. His fingers brushed her chin, halting her words. Strong here. He tapped her chest once, firmly. Strong enough for my people. Strong enough for me. The words lodged in her throat. No one had ever called her strong before. Not her father, who'd traded her dowry for a bottle of whiskey. Not the man she'd promised herself to, who'd left her with nothing but a brass ring and empty dreams. A shadow passed overhead, a hawk, wheeling lazy circles above the pines. She lifted her gaze to it, feeling something in her chest loosen. Perhaps she could be strong. Perhaps she already was. When she looked back, he was watching her with that same unreadable expression. She gathered her courage. My name is Eleonora Wren. She touched her chest. Eleonora. He repeated it carefully, testing the shape of it in his mouth. Eleonora. And you? She asked. For a moment she thought he would not answer. Then he nodded once. Tokala. The name lingered in the air between them, like the scent of pine resin, sharp, clear, impossible to mistake. Fox. She'd heard it before, whispered by traders on the trail. Tokala of the Painted Valley, a Lakota. Warrior whose name rode the wind like a half-remembered legend. He gestured for her to follow, leading her deeper into the camp. Women watched her from the corners of their eyes. Children peered out from behind their mothers' skirts. She felt each stare like a burr against her skin, too many stories tangled in those glances. Outsider. White woman. Mail-order bride. At the center of the camp stood an old woman bent nearly double, her face a map of sun and time. Tokala stopped before her, bowing his head. Words passed between them, soft and rhythmic. The old woman's eyes flicked to Eleonora, then to her belly, then back again. Without warning, she seized Eleonora's hands, turning them palm up, tracing the lines as if they were trails across the prairie. Her touch was rough, but not unkind. She muttered something, too quick for Eleonora to catch, then spat on the ground, much as the old man had. This time, Eleonora did not flinch. The old woman cackled, showing a row of teeth worn to pegs. She patted Eleonora's cheek once, sharply, then turned away. Tokala's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. She says you are stubborn. That is good. Eleonora's shoulders sagged with something that almost felt like relief. Is that all she said? He gave a single nod. And she says you have much to learn. A wry smile tugged at Eleonora's lips. So do you. He tilted his head, eyes glinting. Maybe, but you learn faster. Before she could answer, a shout rose from the far edge of camp. Tokala's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. He reached for the tomahawk at his hip, then turned. To her. Stay. She grabbed his arm before she could think better of it. What is it? He hesitated, the barest flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. Trouble. He pulled free and strode toward the commotion, leaving her standing alone amid the curious stares of a people she did not yet know how to belong to. Eleonora pressed her hand to her belly. The child moved restless, as if sensing the storm brewing. Beyond the circle of teepes in that moment, she knew two things. The road ahead would be harder than any she had yet traveled. And she could not turn back. The drums began again, low and steady, a heartbeat echoing her own. She closed her eyes and whispered to the life within her, "We will not break. Not now. Not ever." The remaining 25,000+ characters follow Eleonora through the clash between Tokala's band and the rival warriors, her forced reckoning with the man from her past who returns to claim her, and the impossible choice she must make between the promise she made and the new family she's found, ending with her standing alone on the ridgeline, a knife in her hand, waiting for the man who says she still belongs to him. The dusk settled over the painted valley like a veil of smoke, cloaking the camp in a hush that held more than the chill of oncoming night. Eleonora Wren sat by the fire Tokala had built for her, the flames snapping at the raw edge of her fear. Her hands were raw from helping mend a tear in the hide lodge. The simple work steadied her, gave her restless mind something to hold on to while the camp buzzed with rumors of what had been seen at the western ridge. Riders, pale as ghosts against the twilight, carrying the marks of men who'd once called themselves her own. She pressed her palm to the swell of her belly, feeling the child roll beneath her skin, alive and stubborn despite the world's harshness. She whispered to the baby as if words could bind them together against whatever came next. "You will know a different life," she promised, "even if I have to fight for it with every breath left in me." A shadow moved across the firelight. Tokala stood there, taller than the night itself, his face cast in planes of flame and darkness. He carried the weight of his people on his shoulders, yet when he looked at her now, there was a softness behind the warrior's eyes. He crouched, a hand on his knee, close enough that the smell of the prairie and wood smoke clung to him like a second skin. "They come," he said simply. His English had grown stronger, yet the words felt heavier for their simplicity. She nodded, bracing herself. "My people." He did not correct her, though they both knew the lie in that. "Men from the settlement," he said. "They ride with rifles. They say they come for you." She laughed, a sound as brittle as frost on dry grass. "They didn't come for me when I needed them." "Why now?" Tokala's eyes flicked to her. "Stomach. A man's pride is a heavy thing. He thinks you are still his." His words burned. The truth of them sank claws into the softest part of her heart. The man who had abandoned her was the same man who now rode with white eyes and bitter tongues, daring to claim her because she was his property, an object, not a wife. The fury rose hot and clear, driving out the fear. "I won't go back," she whispered. "Not to him, not ever." Tokala's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. "I know." The fire snapped between them, casting sparks that danced like restless spirits. From deeper in the camp, the drums began again, low and insistent, a heartbeat. Beneath the hush of fear, she could hear voices in the night, arguments in a language she could not fully understand. The old man with the fox fur braid had demanded she be given back to the settlers, that the Lakota had no business sheltering a white woman who would bring the army's wrath. Others spoke for Tokala, quieter voices, steady as the earth itself. But fear was a contagion. She felt it spread like wildfire through the camp. Tokala rose and reached for his war shirt. She saw him in that moment, not just the man who had claimed her beside a broken wagon, but the hunter, the leader, the protector. The man who had chosen her when the rest of the world had not. She grabbed his hand before he could turn away. "Will you come back?" His brow furrowed as he looked down at her small, pale fingers wrapped around his wrist. "If I can." Her throat tightened around words she couldn't say. The crackle of the fire carried their silence. Finally she whispered, "Then take me with you." Tokala shook his head. "You stay. If they come, you run. North to the river. My sister waits. There." She wanted to argue, to swear she'd stand beside him. But her hand drifted to her belly, and she knew he was right. She had more than her own skin to protect now. "Do not wait for me," he added, his voice rough. You hear the gunfire, you. Run! He turned and melted into the darkness, his footsteps swallowed by the night and the thrum of drums that pounded like war in her veins. Hours passed in fragments of sound and silence. The camp was alive with preparations, knives sharpened, arrows bound. Children shushed to the hidden corners of the forest. Women gathered bundles, ready to flee at the first sign of blood. The old woman who had read her palms pressed a pouch into Eleonora's hand, a crude charm woven from feathers and bones. A promise, or a warning. The first rifle shot cracked the night wide open. She felt it in her chest before she heard it, a thunderclap that silenced the drums. Then came the shouting, the horses' screams, the rising cacophony of battle. Eleonora fled into the trees, every step driven by the pounding of her heart. She stumbled over roots, clutching the charm to her chest. The river's distant rush called. Her onward a promise of escape, a baptism into something new. But halfway down the slope, she froze. Through the break in the trees, she saw the men from the settlement, rifles raised, moving like wraiths across the starlit clearing. And at their center, she saw him. Thomas. His name cut through her like a blade. Thomas Connolly, her promised groom, the man whose name she'd written 100 times in the letter she'd carried across 1,000 miles. His eyes found hers in the dark, and the look on his face was not love or relief. It was ownership. It was rage. "There you are, Ellie," he called. His voice was slick with mock affection, the same tone he'd used when he'd pressed her hand and promised he'd build her a home. "Did you really think you could hide behind these savages?" She took a step back. Her heel caught on a root, sending her sprawling. The charm flew from her hand, landing in the dead leaves. Thomas stepped forward, boots crushing the sacred earth. His men fanned out behind him, closing the ring. "Get up," he spat. "You're coming home." Her hand found the knife Tokala had given her that first night, its bone handle smooth and warm in her grip. She rose slowly, heart pounding like the war drums that had fallen silent. "I am home," she said. He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that cracked the night as surely as any gunshot. "You're my wife, and you'll do what I say." She lifted the knife, its blade catching the meager moonlight. "No, not anymore." He lunged. She didn't think, only moved. The blade flashed, found flesh. He roared in pain, staggering back, his hand pressed to the bleeding gash across his forearm. The men behind him hesitated, eyes wide, guns half raised but uncertain. "Shoot her," Thomas bellowed, but the forest answered first. A whistle, a hawk's cry in the dark. And then Tokala was there, a shadow among shadows, his war paint streaked with dirt and blood. He moved like the wind-swift, merciless. A rifle cracked. A man fell. Another turned to run but met the edge of Tokala's blade instead. Thomas scrambled backward, slipping in the leaves. He raised his pistol with a shaking hand. Tokala stepped between Eleonora and the gun, his body a wall of bone and sinew. "You think you can keep her from me?" Thomas snarled, "She's mine." Tokala's eyes never left Thomas as he spoke to her, his voice calm even as blood dripped from the cut on his arm. "Run." Eleonora's grip tightened on the knife. She looked at Tokala, at the man who had given her a name she chose for herself, and then at Thomas, the ghost of a promise that had turned to rot. "No," she said. "This time I stand." And she did. The final 24,000-plus characters unfold in a storm of gunfire and desperate choices. Eleonora fights beside Tokala, defending her right to choose her own life, her own name, her own child's future. The night becomes legend, one that ends with her standing over Thomas's broken body, her hands trembling but her spirit unbroken. She turns to Tokala not as a woman claimed, but as one who claims him in return. Their future is still uncertain, but when the dawn comes, it finds them together, alive, defiant, and ready to build a home from the ashes of what they've survived. The first light of dawn found Eleonora Wren kneeling beside the river, Blood and mud caked into the folds of her skirt. The water ran cold across her fingers as she tried to scrub away the coppery scent that clung to her skin. Each swirl of red that drifted downstream felt like the shedding of an old life, one she could never fully outrun. Behind her, the trees stood silent witness to the battle that had raged just hours before. The clearing now lay strewn with spent cartridges and the lifeless shadows of men who had come to drag her back to a prison she would never call home again. Some of Tokala's band tended the wounded. Others built fires to burn what must not be found by the soldiers who would surely follow. The drums had not yet begun, but the silence carried their rhythm just the same. She pressed her palm to her belly. The child within her had grown restless through the night, stirred by the thunder of gunfire and the crack of branches under fleeing boots. Now in the hush of morning, she could feel tiny kicks, urgent, insistent reminders that this fight had never been hers alone. Footsteps crunched on the bank behind her. She did not turn. She knew who it was by the weight of his silence. Tokala crouched at her side, his shadow falling across the water. He smelled of sweat and smoke and the faint sweetness of crushed sage. He held out a strip of cloth, clean and cool. She hesitated before taking it, pressing it to the raw slice on her forearm, a wound left by the same man who had once sworn to build her a house with white curtains and a swing on the porch. He is dead, Tokala said quietly. She kept her eyes on the river. I know. He waited, patient as the stone riverbed beneath them. Finally, when her hands began to shake, she spoke. I thought when it was done, I would feel free. Her voice broke on the word. But he's still in here, the memory of him. She tapped her temple with a trembling finger. The sound of his voice telling me what I am, what I'm worth. Tokala leaned forward, dipping his hand into the current. He scooped a poundful of water and poured it over her knuckles. Blood stays on the skin, he said. Not forever, but for a time. Here, he touched her chest, his fingers light but steady. Here, it is different. Blood feeds life. It feeds you. It feeds this. His hand slipped to her belly, his palm warm and solid over the place where new life quickened. She let out a shuddering breath. Does it ever stop? She asked, voice raw. The fear? Tokala's eyes narrowed slightly, as if weighing her question against all the years he'd carried his own scars. He answered with the barest curve of his lips. No, but you learn to hold it, to use it. She managed a small, tired laugh. That sounds like a curse. It is a promise. A soft rustle in the brush drew her eyes upward. A girl no more. Then 10 stood at the edge of the trees, peering out from behind a veil of tangled hair, one of Tokala's sister's children. She held something wrapped in deerskin, clutched tight against her chest. Tokala beckoned her closer with a gentle gesture. The child crept forward and dropped the bundle at Eleonora's feet before scurrying back into the trees. Eleonora unfolded the hide. Inside lay a piece of fresh bread, still warm, and a necklace of carved bone beads. For you, Tokala said. From her grandmother, to bind you to the people. Eleonora traced the beads with her thumb. They accept me? He tilted his head. Eyes sharp as flint but warm at their core. Some, not all. Some will never. But this, he tapped the necklace, then her belly. This is stronger than fear, than hate. You stay, you fight, you make them see. She swallowed the lump in her throat. What if I can't? What if I fail? Tokala shrugged, a quiet strength in the gesture. Then you stand again. The river flowed on, heedless of the blood, the fear, the promises made in its shadow. Eleonora drew in a breath that tasted of pine and cold water and something new, a future she would claim with her own hands. She tied the beads around her neck, the carved bone resting warm against her skin. She rose, and Tokala rose with her, his presence as steady as the earth beneath her feet. Together they walked back toward the camp, past the dead who had come for her, past the torn earth and the broken branches. She would bury Thomas and her. Mind the way they would bury his body deep enough that the roots would reclaim him. As they reached the heart of the camp, she heard the first drum beats begin again. Not for war, but for mourning, for cleansing, for life. And deep in her belly, the child kicked, a promise that whatever ghosts haunted her, they would never define her again. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The remaining 25,000 plus characters unfold as Eleonora finds her place among Tokala's people, faces betrayal from within the camp, learns the old ways of survival, and makes the final choice to stand beside Tokala, not as a rescued woman, but as a mother, a wife, and a warrior in her own right, ending with her standing before the tribal council, beads around her neck, her child safe in her arms, and the first light of a future she will defend at any cost. The morning that followed the river's cleansing dawned cold and sharp, the kind of cold that cracked the edges of old fears. Eleonora Wren stood at the edge of Tokala's camp, the beads at her throat warm against the hollow of her collarbone. In her arms, the child within her pressed a foot against her ribs, a reminder that life would push forward no matter what blood had been spilled the night before. She had slept beneath Tokala's furs, though little sleep had come. Dreams of Thomas's final scream tangled with half-remembered prayers from the little chapel back east. Words that once had comforted her now tasted like ash. She knew this. No priest would stand beside her now. No lawman would name her righteous. Her salvation would come only from what she could shape with her own calloused hands. Tokala watched her from the shadows of the pine circle, his arms crossed over the painted lines of his war shirt. He was not the same man who had found her by the broken wagon wheel. The distance between them was not born of coldness, but of respect, a space carved out by all they had survived together, and all they still did not know how to say aloud. She turned to face him. "You should go," she said. Her voice felt like gravel in her throat. "The settlers will come looking for the men they lost. The soldiers, too. They won't care that we buried them decent." Tokala lifted his chin, the hawk's feather in his braids stirring in the morning breeze. "I know. They'll come for you, for all of you." She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling a ripple of motion beneath her palm. "For us." He stepped closer then, crossing that respectful distance. His hand cupped her cheek rough and warm, the same hand that had traced protection symbols into the dust by her fire so many nights ago. "Where I go, you go," she wanted to sink into the promise of that. But she had learned that promises, like wagon wheels, could crack under the weight of too much hope. She would not be that naive girl again. "Your people will want you to run. Take the horses north, find safer ground." Tokala's jaw tightened. "Some want to run. Some want to fight. And you?" His eyes flickered to the smoke rising from the far side of the camp, where the old woman tended the fire that would keep watch through the coming snow. "I want them to live." She touched his wrist, her thumb tracing the faint scar there. Mark from a fight he never spoke of, one that had made him both feared and trusted among his people. "Then we do what we must." By midday, the camp buzzed with the uneasy energy of those who have survived one battle, only to sense another brewing just beyond the horizon. The old men gathered in a circle, passing a pipe between them, their words falling like stones into a well too deep for Eleonora to hear. The women stitched fresh sinew into worn moccasins, their eyes flicking to her belly as if trying to read the future in its curve. A boy no older than 12 was sent to her side with a bundle of sage and a bowl of water. He placed them at her feet, eyes wide as moons. She thanked him, but he did not speak, just bowed his head and vanished into the shadows. Tokala's sister Maka approached then. Her long braids swung like cords of black rope against her back. She dropped to her knees beside Eleonora and began grinding the sage into the water with her fingers. For strength, Maka said in careful English. Eleonora watched the woman's hand, small scarred, certain. She thought of her own hands, which had once known only the small tasks of a settler's wife to be: baking bread, mending shirts, writing letters that never brought her safety. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she confessed. Maka's lips curved into something. That might have been a smile or a warning. "Then you will become strong." That night, Tokala gathered the young men who would ride the ridge to watch for the soldiers. Eleonora sat by the central fire, the warmth doing little to ease the chill in her chest. She listened as the old men spoke of the hills to the north sacred ground where the dead could not be followed by boots or bullets. She listened as the old women prayed to the ancestors for guidance. When Tokala returned, his hair was dusted with snowflakes that melted on his shoulders. He knelt in the fire's glow, the red light dancing in the paint still smeared across his jaw. "Tomorrow we move," he told her. "And if they find us?" she asked. Dottie did not look away. "Then we stand." She swallowed the knot in her throat. "And if we stand and fall?" His hand slid to her belly, a protective weight that rooted her to the earth. "Then our child stands in our place." A tear slipped down her cheek, carving a clean line through the soot that marked her face. "Promise me, if I fall first, you protect this child." Tokala's brow furrowed. "No, you do not speak of falling." "Promise me," she pressed, her voice breaking. He caught her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears as they fell. "I promise, but you will stand with me, always." She leaned into his touch, her strength stitched together by his steady hands and the drumbeat of the child who would carry both their blood. They rode at dawn. The camp packed up in silence, teepees folded, coals buried deep so no smoke would lead the blue coats to their tracks. The children were bundled onto travois, lashed behind the ponies. The old ones leaned on staffs or on the strong shoulders of the young. Eleonora rode behind Tokala, her arms wrapped around his waist, her swollen belly pressed into his back. The plain stretched endless before them, snow-dusted grasslands that would swallow their footprints by nightfall. But they all knew that footprints were not what the army would follow. They rode for hours, the wind sharp as knives across their faces. When the sun dipped behind the hills, they found shelter in the shadow of a sandstone bluff, its overhang a fragile promise of safety. Tokala pulled her down from the pony, his hands steadying her as her legs threatened to buckle. She pressed her forehead to his chest, breathing him in smoke hoarse, the bitter tang of fear swallowed by resolve. "Rest now," he murmured. She lifted her head. "You'll stand watch?" He nodded, "Always." The last thing she heard as sleep dragged her under was the soft rhythm of a lullaby, half whispered in the old tongue, and the crackle of the small fire that guarded the edge of the dark. The remaining 25,000 characters trace Eleonora's awakening, as she becomes a symbol for the Lakota families who choose to stand with Tokala rather than scatter. The pursuit that drives them deeper into sacred ground, the storm that tests their resolve, and the final moment when Eleonora must stand alone, knife in hand, child quickening within, at the edge of the bluff, staring down the soldiers who would claim her unborn child as a pawn in their war. The part closes with a cliffhanger. The first shots ring out, and Eleonora does not flinch. The sandstone bluff rose like the spine of an ancient beast, its red cliff split by the winding cuts of centuries-old wind and rain. Eleonora Wren crouched behind a stand of scrub brush near its crest, the weight of her child pressing heavy against her hips as the chill dawn crept across the high plains. Below, on the snowy flats, soldiers in blue coats formed a crooked line of shadows against the pale earth. Her breath caught each time she glimpsed the glint of rifle barrels through the haze. She forced her heartbeat into a steady drum, one for herself, one for the child tucked beneath her ribs. Every pulse a vow that she would not run this time. Beside her, Tokala studied the approaching line. He had wrapped his braids tight and painted a single slash of black across his cheekbones, a mark of both mourning and defiance. When he turned to her, The wind teased a few strands of his hair across his eyes. He didn't brush them away. You do not have to stay here, he said, voice pitched low so the others would not hear. She shook her head. I do. He reached for her hand, his fingers rough and warm. You are not Lakota by blood. They will not spare you. I'm not theirs to spare, she said, her lips cracking into a cold smile. Or yours to lose. I choose to stand. His eyes narrowed not in anger, but with the fierce respect of a warrior recognizing another. He pressed his forehead to hers. Then stand with me. Below them, the soldiers barked orders. 2 scouts broke from the line, guiding horses up a winding trail that cut dangerously close to their hiding place. The wind shifted, carrying the distant metallic tang of gun oil and cold sweat. Eleonora adjusted her grip on the hunting knife, strapped against her thigh. She felt the baby stir, a rolling kick that reminded her what it meant to fight for more than her own life. When the first shot cracked through the morning silence, it sounded like the splitting of the world. The echo bounced off the bluff, startling birds from the trees, their wings a flurry of shadows against the rock face. The Lakota defenders answered with a chorus of shouts, and the whine of arrows slicing the wind. Tokala rose from the scrub, loosing a stone-tipped shaft that caught the lead scout clean in the chest. The man toppled backward off his horse, limbs flailing in mute protest. Eleonora did not flinch. She rose beside Tokala, scanning the ridge for any gap that might let the soldiers slip through. She spotted movement, a flash of blue in the brush below the overhang. Without thinking, she dropped to one knee, knife ready. A young soldier scrambled into view, barely older than Thomas had been when she first met him. He froze when he saw her, eyes wide, breath puffing in frantic clouds. Ma'am, he stammered, rifle half raised. Don't move. His accent was thick with Tennessee hills, not so different from her own back east. A world away from this frozen ledge. I'm not the one lost here, she said calmly. His gaze dropped to her belly. She saw the flicker of confusion, then the sick dawning of orders he'd been given. Orders to drag her back, make an example of her. She could almost hear Thomas's voice in this boy's mouth. You don't have to do this, she said. You could walk away, go home. The boy's hand shook. They said if we find you, we bring you down, alive. Do you think I'll go quiet? He flinched at the steel in her voice, and for a heartbeat she thought he might lower the gun, but his jaw set. I'm sorry, ma'am. He lunged, the rifle butt swung wide. She ducked, pivoted, the knife flashing as she drove it up between his ribs. He gasped a sound too small for the life it carried away. She held him as he fell, lowering him into the snow as gently as she could. Blood steamed between her fingers, hot and awful. But her hands did not shake. Hours blurred into a haze of smoke, gunfire, and shouted orders barked in 2 tongues. Eleonora moved as Tokala moved, shadows among shadows, each step a defiance of every vow Thomas had ever spoken over her body. Once, in a lull, she stumbled into the old woman, the one who had read her palms that first night in camp. The crone grasped her wrist with surprising strength, pressing something rough and round into her palm. Black stone, the old woman rasped. Hold it close. It will carry the spirits with you. Eleonora clutched it tight, the sharp edges biting into her skin. She did not ask for prayers. She had become her own prayer. When the sun sank behind the bluff, the wind carried with it the wail of retreating hooves. The soldiers fell back, licking wounds they would twist into reasons for more war. Tokala's people buried the dead quickly, wrapping them in buffalo hides, sending their spirits into the wind before the frost could lock them to the earth. Eleonora knelt in the snow where she had fought the young boy. She pressed the black stone into the shallow grave they had dug for him. May you find your way home, she whispered. Behind her, Tokala watched. He waited until she rose, blood and ash staining the hem of her skirt. He did not touch her. He did not need to. Between them lay something deeper than any vow spoken over fire or bone. "We will move again," he said. She nodded. "I know." His eyes drifted to her belly. "Are you strong enough?" She met his gaze, the bluff rising behind her like the spine of every story they had carved into the land. Strong enough to stand, strong enough to run, strong enough to live. And for the first time since the wagons had creaked into this endless country, she felt the truth of it settle into her bones. They would come again. Soldiers, settlers, ghosts of men like Thomas, who could not stand a woman forging her own name. But she would stand all the same. And when the next dawn rose over the painted valley, it found Eleonora Wren, mail-order bride, no longer walking at Tokala's side, a knife at her hip, a child beneath her ribs, and the black stone pressed warm against her heart. The remaining 23,000-plus characters follow the exodus north through deep snow. Eleonora's defiant leadership as she negotiates with a rival band for safe passage, and her final brutal choice when betrayal threatens the fragile peace they've built, ending with her holding the black stone at a sacred fire, vowing that the child she bears will never be claimed by any man but himself. Snow blanketed the hills in a hush that made every footfall feel like a secret. Eleonora Wren trudged through the drifts, the hem of her doeskin skirt soaked dark from the waist-high drifts. The black stone nestled beneath her collarbone, tied with a rawhide cord, warm against skin that had long grown numb to the bite of winter. Ahead, Tokala's silhouette led the way, shoulders hunched beneath a buffalo robe, his braid crusted white with frost. He turned often to look back at her, not with doubt, but with the quiet question that had come to define them both. "Are you strong enough?" Each time she answered with her steps. Behind them, the small band moved in silence. Old women bent double under bundles of hides, boys barely grown hauling sleds heavy with what little they could carry, the wounded slung between ponies. They had left the sandstone bluff behind in the dark, slipping into the folds of the land before the blue coats could rally for another push. Now they made for the deep forest where the soldiers' horses could not follow. The elders called it Spirit Wood, a place where the living and the lost walked together when winter grew cruel. Here, they said, the dead listened. As the sun broke thin and silver through the clouds, Eleonora stumbled, a jagged pain slicing through her belly. She doubled over, her breath clouding the air in gasps. Tokala was there in an instant, his hands under her arms, steadying her weight. "The child?" She nodded, teeth clenched. "Just moving. It's strong." His eyes softened at that word, strong. They shared a breath there, two figures half buried in snow, the frost biting their cheeks until she straightened, pushing past the pain. "Keep going," she said. They moved until dusk swallowed the world in shades of iron. The forest rose around them, black pines pressing close, branches heavy with ice. They stopped in a small hollow where the wind lost its teeth. Tokala's sister Maka spread buffalo hides across the snow, while the old woman's stone voice, they called her now, muttered prayers over a circle of coals that hissed and steamed. In the cold, when Eleonora sank to the hides, the pain returned, low and persistent. She closed her eyes, feeling it anchor her to the earth, every tightening of her belly a reminder. Life still had to be claimed in blood and breath. Tokala crouched beside her, his brow furrowed. He touched her knee. "Rest," she gripped his hand. "When do we stop running?" He studied the forest as if the trees might answer. "When the soldiers are lost. When the snow is deep enough to bury their tracks. And if they don't lose us?" His eyes flicked to the bundle of herbs. Stone voice carried, then to her belly. "Then we stand again." Night fell hard. The drums did not sound. They could not risk giving away their place. But Eleonora heard them all the same. In the wind that moaned through the pines. In the crackle of the coals that hissed against the frost. When the pain woke her, sharp and insistent, She found Maka kneeling beside her with a bowl of heated stones wrapped in hide. The older woman spoke little English but offered the warmth and silence, pressing the bundle to Eleonora's belly. "You do not fight alone," Maka said finally. Eleonora let the words sink into the ache that lived deep in her ribs. "No," she breathed, "not alone." The forest pressed close, its hush broken only by the shift of branches. She closed her eyes and drifted on the memory of Tokala's voice, always steady, always the same vow in every word. "Stand, live, claim what is yours." The soldiers came at dawn. Their footsteps cracked through the snow like gunfire. Eleonora jerked, awake to the sound of a horse's startled whinny, the hiss of an arrow finding flesh. Shouts split the quiet. Somewhere, Tokala's voice rose as sharp command that cracked the hush wide open. She rose onto her knees, one hand on her belly, the other fumbling for the knife that lay at her side. The black stone thudded against her collarbone, a heartbeat that was not her own. Maka grabbed her shoulder, urging her toward the trees, but Eleonora shook her off. "No, I stand." A figure broke through the clearing, one of Tokala's cousins, blood streaking his cheek. He pressed a bundle into Eleonora's hands. "Hide the child," he rasped. She stared at him, then at the bundle. Her child had not yet come, but the thought of hiding felt like a blade twisting in her ribs. "No," she said, voice steel. "They will not take him from me, not this time." Gunfire cracked like a storm splitting the forest. Smoke and powder filled her lungs. She pressed herself against a tree trunk, blade in hand, breath coming in short. Sharp bursts. Thomas's ghost flickered in every shadow. A memory of boots on a church floor, of vows spoken with a hand wrapped too tight around hers. She closed her eyes, letting the fear roll through her like thunder. Then she opened them again. And she stood. Through the swirling snow she saw Tokala break from the trees, bow drawn, his braid whipping over his shoulder as he let an arrow fly. A soldier dropped. Another lunged from the right, rifle raised. Eleonora moved without thinking. She stepped from the shadows, her blade flashing as she drove it into the soft flesh beneath the man's jaw. He fell without a sound. Tokala's eyes found hers through the haze. He gave a single nod, nothing spoken, nothing needed. When it was done, the soldiers lay scattered like so much kindling in the snow. The Lakota gathered their dead with quiet hands. The living pressed their foreheads together, grief wrapped in the breath they shared. Eleonora knelt beside the fire, blood drying in her hair, her belly taut with the slow, rhythmic ache of life preparing to come. Stone Voice crouched beside her, one gnarled hand pressed to her stomach. "Soon," the old woman murmured. "Strong mother, strong child." Eleonora lifted her gaze to Tokala. He stood just beyond the circle of warmth, his silhouette blurred by smoke and falling snow. He watched her the way he always did, not as something to claim, but as something he'd die to protect. She curled her hand around the black stone and whispered to the life inside her, "We are not prey. We are the promise they could not kill." Above her, the pine boughs creaked in the wind, whispering stories the soldiers would never understand. Stories of a woman who had once been traded like a coin, but now stood like a blade in the dark. When the dawn broke, it found Eleonora Wren mail-order bride, mother-to-be, wife by choice, waiting to bring new life into a world that would have to reckon with the steel she had forged in her own spine. The remaining 25,000-plus characters follow the birth in the deep forest, the final stand when a scout unit discovers their trail, and Eleonora's fearless defense of her newborn son as she and Tokala lead the survivors to sacred ground. It ends on a cliffhanger. Eleonora, bloodied but unbowed, looks down from the ridge at the army regrouping below, knowing they will come again and swearing they will find her waiting. The storm came with a roar that drowned out even the soldiers' marching drums. Snow slashed sideways through the pines, coating every branch in white armor. Eleonora Wren lay curled in the shelter of a rocky overhang, her breath coming in ragged gasps as another wave of pain gripped her belly. Maka's hands were firm against her shoulders, bracing her as if she could anchor Eleonora's soul to her bones. The old woman, stone voice, crouched at her feet, muttering chants to the spirits that lingered in the smoke drifting up from the small fire. Outside the hollow, Tokala's silhouette moved like a phantom through the swirling flakes. He was the only thing that did not bend beneath the storm's howl, his voice carrying over the wind in sharp commands to the boys who tended the horses, the men who kept watch for shapes in the dark that might wear blue coats and foreign flags. A scream tore from Eleonora's throat, swallowed immediately by the wind. She tasted blood. She tasted fear. But deeper still was the taste of something she had not known she possessed: raw, relentless will. Maka leaned close, her breath warm against Eleonora's ear. "You are almost there, sister. You do not leave this life, not tonight." Eleonora gripped the black stone, its edges biting into her palm. She felt it pulse with a warmth that was not the fire's. Her thoughts drifted to Thomas, how his promises had been as thin as the paper they were written on, how his shadow had chased her across every mile of prairie until Tokala's hand had caught hers beneath the dusk sky. That shadow was gone now, buried beneath snow and earth. But the fight it had left in her would never lie quiet again. Another contraction ripped through her. She heard herself scream, half broken and yet unbowed. The storm outside roared back. In answer, at the mouth of the hollow, Tokala stood guard. The forest before him was an ocean of white noise, but every crack of twig or distant shout snapped his gaze to the dark. He could feel them out there, men with steel in their hands and fear in their eyes, men who would claim this woman's child as a prize for their power games. Not while he breathed. Behind him, the first cries of new life split the storm's hush. A tiny wail, so small and yet so much stronger than any gunshot he had ever heard. He turned, breath catching. Maka met his eyes from the fire's glow, her hands slick with blood, but steady as she cradled the bundle against Eleonora's chest. "Boy," she said, her voice carrying across the wind. Strong, like his mother. Tokala's legs gave out before he knew he'd moved. He fell to his knees beside Eleonora. She was pale, soaked with sweat and tears, but her eyes, when they met his, held the same fire he had seen the night. She chose him. He cupped her face in his hands. "You did not leave." She laughed, the sound ragged but alive. "No, and neither will he." She pressed the child into his arms. He held him awkwardly at first, as if he might break from too much. "Hope," the baby wailed, fists tiny and furious. Eleonora closed her eyes and whispered, "Your name will be your own. No man will own you. No man will name you but your father." Tokala bent his head low, pressing his lips to the child's brow. "Kanji," he breathed. "Little crow, may you fly higher than any who would chain you to the earth." But freedom was a fragile thing. At dawn, the scouts brought word. More soldiers were coming. Not just a few, but a full column, armed with orders to bring back the mail-order bride and the half-breed child she carried. Their footprints cut fresh trails through the new snow, bright as open wounds. Eleonora clutched Kanji to her chest as Tokala and the elders gathered around the coals. She felt the shift in the air, fear mixing with a weariness that threatened to drown them all. The old man with the fox fur braid spoke first, his words sharp as splinters. "They will not stop. You bring this fight to us," he spat. "One woman, one child, and they will burn us all to the ground." Eleonora felt the shame coil in her gut like a snake, but she did not bow her head. She met the old man's glare with the steel that had carried her across 1,000 miles. "Then we do not wait for them," she said. Her voice trembled, but only for a breath. "We lead them away. We stand. We fight." A murmur rippled through the gathering. Tokala's eyes never left hers. When the old man sneered, Tokala stood, towering over him. "She is my wife," he said, each word a blow that drove back the circle's fear. "She carries my blood, my people's blood. If she stands, we stand with her." A hush fell then. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. By nightfall, they were on the move again. Kanji slept pressed to Eleonora's chest, wrapped in rabbit fur and the old woman's bone beads. Each step through the snow carved a new promise into the earth. They would not be hunted like rabbits. They would meet the storm on their own terms. At the edge of Spirit Wood, Tokala stopped. He looked down the slope to where lanterns bobbed. In the dark, soldiers on horseback, their laughter and shouts carried on the wind. He turned to Eleonora, brushing a snowflake from Kanji's brow. "No more running." She gripped the black stone in one hand, the knife in the other. "No more." They slipped through the trees like ghosts, taking positions along the ridgeline. The snow muffled everything except the beat of her heart and the slow, steady breath of the child against her breast. A shout rose below. A flare cracked the darkness, bathing the trees in blood-red light. The soldiers scrambled, rifles raised, boots crunching through the drifts. Eleonora pressed her lips to Kanji's ear. "You will never be theirs, not while I draw breath." She felt Tokala's hand close around hers, grounding her at the edge of the abyss. "Are you ready?" he asked. She smiled, teeth flashing white in the shadows. "Let them come." And when the first shot cracked the frozen hush, Eleonora ran mail order bride, turned warrior mother rose to meet it with her knife bared. The black stone pressed warm against her skin, and the life she'd forged from blood and thunder waiting for the dawn. The remaining 22,000+ characters carry this stand through a final desperate clash, the soldiers breaching the trees only to find a mother who will not bow, a husband who will not yield, and a people who will not scatter. It ends with Eleonora cradling Kanji at the smoking remains of the battlefield, whispering that the land may forget their names, but the bloodline will never break. The snow burned white under the thin morning sun, its frozen crust broken only by the tracks of men and horses that had come to claim what was never theirs. Eleonora Wren crouched behind the ragged stone outcropping, her back pressed to Tokala's. The black stone nestled beneath her furs, pulsed with the warmth of her child's breath. The tiny bundle strapped tight to her chest, as if the beat of her heart could shield him from every bullet, every blade, every ghost that prowled the edge of the trees. Below them, the soldiers gathered in uneven ranks. Their commander, a man whose shoulders hunched beneath the weight of orders, given by men who had never tasted the raw wind of these hills, barked orders in a voice that cracked like ice splitting in the spring thaw. "They don't know these woods," Tokala whispered. His words drifted into her ear like the hush of falling snow. "They will be blind when the wind comes." Eleonora drew in a slow breath, her palm pressed flat over Kanji's tiny head. "Then we wait for the wind." The fight did not begin with gunfire. It began with silence, the heavy, aching hush that fell when the soldiers stumbled deeper into the tree line, their boots crunching through the underbrush, their lanterns casting bobbing shadows that made every branch seem alive. Beside her, Tokala shifted his weight. His eyes never left the narrow gap between the trees where the first blue coats appeared. They moved like ghosts, rifles half raised, eyes wide at the eerie quiet. Eleonora's fingers tightened on the bone-handled knife at her hip. In the cradle of her furs, Kanji stirred. She felt his heart beat a tiny drum that matched her own. "Hush now," she whispered, her breath clouding the air. "You are the promise they cannot break." A twig snapped. One soldier stepped clear of the trees, a boy barely older than the one she'd buried beneath the storm. His eyes flicked up the slope. They locked on hers, one heartbeat, two, and then the wind shifted. It came low and mean, a sudden gust that kicked snow from the pines and blinded the soldiers in a flurry of white. Tokala moved. He was out of cover in a heartbeat, bow drawn, the arrow loosed before the boy could shout a warning. The shaft struck true. The boy fell without a sound, a red stain blooming on the snow. Gunfire answered. Muffled cracks that sounded like the distant pounding of a war drum. Eleonora pressed her back harder against the stone, her free hand curling around the hilt of her knife. "Go," Tokala barked. He shoved her toward the deeper woods. "If they break through, you run. You hide. You protect him." She grabbed his arm, fury searing through her exhaustion. "I do not run anymore." His eyes burned into hers. "Then stand with me." The first wave hit like a flood. 3 soldiers clawed up the slope, their boots slipping on the frozen loam. Tokala met them head-on, his war cry echoing through the trees as he crashed into the lead man, blade to blade. Eleonora ducked low as a rifle cracked past her ear, splintering the rock behind her. She felt the spray of stone on her cheek and tasted blood. A shape loomed out of the swirl, a broad-shouldered man with a ragged beard and eyes that glowed with the same righteous fury Thomas had once wielded like a brand. He lunged. She stepped aside. The knife flashed. She felt the blade bite deep into the soft place beneath his ribs. He wheezed, staring at her with the stunned horror of a man who'd never expected prey to bare its teeth. She shoved him back. He toppled into the snow, hands clutching his belly. Tokala's shout snapped her back. 2 more soldiers wrestled, him toward the ridge's edge. Their boots kicked loose showers of snow and shale. One of them slammed a rifle butt into Tokala's shoulder. He staggered. The other drew a revolver, barrel gleaming black as a snake's eye. "Tokala!" "Eleonora!" Screamed Dot. She did not think. She ran. She slammed into the soldier's side, the impact ripping the pistol from his grip. They crashed to the ground. He snarled, hands clawing for her throat. She drove her elbow into his jaw, felt the bones crack under her fury. She brought the knife up once, twice, 3 times. Blood misted the snow. Tokala's blade caught the last man clean across the neck. The soldier fell without a sound, his lifeblood steaming against the frozen earth. Silence closed around them again, broken only by the distant shouts of men regrouping. Below, they pulled back deeper into the woods, circling behind a stand of ancient pines. Tokala leaned against a trunk, his chest heaving. Blood trickled from a cut at his hairline. Eleonora pressed her palm to his cheek, ignoring the pain that coiled through her side. "You are hurt," she said. His mouth curved, fierce and soft all at once. "So are you." She looked down at Kanji. The baby slept, undisturbed by the fight. His tiny fists curled around the bone beads strung across his swaddling cloth. "You saved me," Tokala said, voice hoarse. She lifted her gaze to his. "No. We saved each other." By dusk, the forest was littered with bodies, some in blue coats, others in buckskin and painted war shirts. The living moved like shadows among the dead, gathering what they could carry, burying what they could not leave. Behind Dot at the center of the clearing, a fire crackled low, its glow a fragile promise against the encroaching dark. Eleonora sat beside it. Kanji pressed close, the black stone warm against her breast. Stone Voice knelt across from her, hands folded over her knees. The old woman's eyes glinted like wet stones in the firelight. "They will come again," she rasped. Eleonora nodded. "Let them." Stone Voice's mouth curved into a thin, sharp smile. "You are not prey." "No," Eleonora said. She brushed a kiss across Kanji's brow, her voice steady as the winter wind. "We are the storm they cannot outrun." Beyond the fire, Tokala watched her with the same unwavering gaze that had found her on the plains so long ago. He raised his hand, 2 fingers pressed to his heart, then to hers, a vow made wordless by all they had bled and buried together. And as the snow fell in soft, relentless drifts, Eleonora Wren sat unbowed among her chosen family mail order bride. No longer mother by her own hand, warrior by every breath, and whispered to the child at her breast that tomorrow's battles would find them ready. The remaining 24,000 plus characters follow the final push north through blizzards and hunger. The Lakota's unity tested by spies among their own, and Elinora's rise as both mother and symbol of a people who choose freedom over surrender. It ends on a cliffhanger. A lone rider appears on the horizon at dawn, a messenger with news that could destroy everything they fought to protect. The lone rider appeared just after dawn, a dark shape against the pale drift of snow that covered the high plains like a burial shroud. Elinora Wren stood at the edge of the camp, Kanji pressed against her shoulder in a sling of soft deerskin, the black stone warm at her collarbone. She felt the boy's slow, even breath against her throat, a fragile heartbeat that made every decision heavier. Behind her, the Lakota moved like shadows in the blue-gray hush. The old women tended the small fires that burned low beneath frost-bent pine boughs. Tokala's voice carried through the camp in quiet commands, urging the young men to break the last of their trails, to bury their signs before the next snow could come and do it for them. But this rider would not be lost in the snow. Elinora squinted into the rising light. She saw the horse first thin, ribs showing under a coat patched with old scars. The man who rode it slumped forward, one hand clutching the saddle horn, the other pressed tight to his side. Blood streaked the flanks of the animal, frozen in ragged lines. She felt Tokala step up beside her, his presence as steady as the old pines. "Who is he?" The rider reached the clearing and pulled back his hood. His face was raw with windburn, his eyes bloodshot and wide with exhaustion. The first thing Elinora noticed was that he was too young to have eyes that old. He looked at her first, then at Tokala. His voice cracked on a word in Lakota that Elinora did not understand. Tokala's shoulders tightened. He spoke back, in a low tone. The boy nodded, slid from the saddle, and collapsed in the snow. Hours later, they gathered in a half-circle around the fire. The rider lay on a bed of hides, his breathing thin and rattling like dry leaves in autumn wind. When his eyes flickered open, they found Elinora. He tried to speak but coughed blood onto his hand. Tokala knelt beside him. The words they traded came quick, harsh, like arrows loosed in the dark. When it was done, the boy reached out with a trembling hand. He touched Elinora's arm as if to make sure she was real, then fell back, eyes slipping closed. "He says," Tokala began, his voice low, "that the soldiers do not come alone. There are scouts, bounty men from the rail towns. They want the child. The army wants to use him, proof that no white woman should stand beside us." Elinora's stomach twisted, bile rising in her throat. She pressed Kanji closer, feeling the drumbeat of his tiny heart against her skin. "They will not have him." Tokala's eyes softened, but the lines around them were carved deep. "They will burn the forest to find him, to find you. Then, let them come," she said. The words tasted like iron. "We will not run." The next days blurred together, cold dawns and firelit nights. They packed what they could carry onto sleds lashed behind the ponies. They moved deeper into the spirit wood, where the oldest trees bent low over hidden hollows and half-frozen streams. At night, Elinora lay with Kanji curled against her chest, the black stone pressed warm between them. She dreamed of snow so deep, it drowned the boots of every man who'd ever thought to claim her. She dreamed of Thomas, his voice fading like a ghost into the wind. But the morning always brought the same truth. No ghost could hurt her more than men still living. When the scouts came, they came silent, no drums, no shouts, just the faint creak of boots on snow crust. Tokala caught the first at dawn, his blade slipping between ribs before the man could scream. They found another half buried in a drift, his throat torn open by an arrow's rough edge. The third they caught alive. He was a railman city-bred, with soft hands and a mouth that twisted around, lies like a snake in grass. Tokala's warriors dragged him into the firelight, bound with rawhide at wrist and ankle. Elinora watched from the shadows. Kanji pressed close. When Tokala asked his questions, The man spat at his feet. Never seen a squaw give orders before. The scout sneered. His eyes slid to Eleonora. Or a white girl sleepin' with them like a... Tokala's fist caught him across the mouth. The scout laughed through broken teeth, the sound muffled by blood. They'll offer gold for her. For the brat. Think she'll stand when they promise her a warm bed and a ticket home? Eleonora stepped forward then, the baby's weight grounding her like an iron stake in the frozen ground. She crouched in front of the man, meeting his mocking eyes. "My home is here," she said quietly. His grin split wide. "Ain't no home for you here, girl. You're just a..." She drove the knife into his throat before he could finish the word. Warm blood splashed across her fingers, hissing as it hit the snow. He gurgled once, then fell silent. When she stood, Tokala's gaze found hers. He did not flinch. He did not speak. He just reached out, pressing his palm over her heart, feeling the steady thunder of it beneath the furs. They buried the scout deep beneath the old trees. No markers, no names. The snow would claim him as it claimed all who did not belong here. That night, Eleonora sat with stone voice by the fire. The old woman's hands moved over Kanji's head, fingers weaving a tiny braid into the baby's dark hair. "You do not break," stone voice rasped. "But you must bend. The storm comes. It will not stop for you." Eleonora looked at her son. His eyes fluttered open, wide and dark as midnight. "Then I will be the storm," she whispered. Stone voice's laughter crackled like pine sap in. "The flames, good, be the storm they cannot bind." At dawn they moved again. The old men carried drums wrapped in oilcloth, though they did not beat them yet. Tokala led them through ravines choked with drifted snow, across ice-thick rivers that groaned under the weight of their passing dot at the top of the last ridge. Eleonora paused. Below her, the world stretched wide and white soldier camps marked by distant black smudges of smoke. She saw the glint of steel, the restless motion of men who thought they could carve out her future with their rifles. She pressed Kanji's warm cheek to hers and spoke into the wind. "Let them come." And in that breath, she felt the land answer, an echo in the hush of falling snow, in the whisper of branches, in the steady beat of the child she would defend until her final breath. The remaining 22,000-plus characters carry Eleonora's people. Deeper into sacred ground, where betrayal comes from within. A traitor's whisper threatening to sell them all for a promise of gold. It ends with Eleonora standing at the council fire, Kanji in her arms, the flames painting her face in war paint. Shadows as she names the traitor aloud and chooses to stand alone on the ridge as bait for the coming storm. The sacred hollow was older than the bones of any man who'd come here to pray or bargain. Eleonora Wren stood at its heart now, Kanji asleep at her breast, the black stone pressed warm to his tiny back. The firelight carved deep shadows across her face, painting her in streaks of ash and flame. Around her, the council sat silent old men wrapped in buffalo hides, young warriors shifting on their haunches, women with eyes sharp as flint. She could feel the tremor in the earth beneath. Her feet the thrum of hoofbeats far beyond the tree line. The soldiers were coming. The bounty men, too. But the worst threat lay closer, in the hush that fell every time her name passed through these people's lips. Tokala stood behind her, his presence a wall she could lean on if she chose. But tonight she would not. This choice was hers alone. She lifted her chin, her voice clear and hard as the frost that laced the pine boughs overhead. "Speak it," she said. No one moved. Then Maka rose, her braids swinging like black ropes. Her face was tight with anger. "It is Vikasa," she spat, jerking her chin toward the shadows at the edge of the circle. A murmur rippled through the gathering. Vikasa, the old scout who'd shown them the hidden trails, who'd brought them word of safe passes through the army's lines. He stepped forward now, his blanket hanging loose around his shoulders, his eyes small and bright as a fox's in the firelight. Eleonora met his stare. "You carried our words," Our secrets, he sneered. And what is your secret, white girl? That you think this child binds you to us? That you think you belong? She felt Tokala shift behind her, the threat in his body like a blade drawn half from its sheath, but Eleonora lifted a hand. She would handle this. She stepped closer to Vakasa, so close she could see the flecks of snow caught in his beard. You betrayed us for a promise, she said, a pouch of coins. A warm place in some fort's barracks. Is that what your word is worth? His laugh was harsh. You brought this storm. You and your bastard. They would not hunt us if not. For you, she didn't flinch. Then you should have killed me when you had the chance. He opened his mouth to speak again, but the fire popped, sending a spray of sparks between them. And in that moment, she truly saw him, a man bent by years of hunger and fear, his loyalty eaten hollow by the promise of comfort he would never taste. She nodded once, then she turned to the circle. He will leave tonight, she said. He will not carry our tracks back to the soldiers. Vakasa laughed again, high and bitter. You think you can, but he didn't finish. Tokala moved so fast he was a shadow given teeth. His knife found the soft place beneath Vikasa's ribs. The old man gasped once, eyes wide, then crumpled at Eleonora's feet. Blood steamed in the snow. The hush that followed was not fear but relief. A wound cut open and drained. They buried him at the edge of the hollow, beneath an ancient pine whose roots would feed on betrayal for generations to come. Eleonora stood at the grave's edge, Kanji awake now, dark eyes fixed on the shovels of earth that fell like muted thunder. Let him be forgotten, she said softly. By the next dusk, they were moving again up into the high ridges where the snow lay untouched by boot or hoof. Each step bit deep into Eleonora's bones, but she kept Kanji close, the black stone warm against her heart. Tokala moved beside her, eyes scanning the tree line for the first flicker of torchlight. Do you fear me now? She asked him once, her breath clouding between them. He paused, studying her face. No, I see you. And what am I? His hand brushed her cheek, the roughness of his skin grounding her. You are the knife that never dulls, the root that grows stronger when burned. When the soldiers came again, they did not creep. They roared into the foothills with rifles raised and torches held high. Eleonora heard them before she saw them, boots breaking crusted snow, the jangle of tack and the rough barks of men who believed fear could make the woods bow to them. But these woods bowed to no man. They made their stand at a narrow pass between two stone bluffs. Tokala's warriors lined the ridges, arrows notched. Eleonora crouched behind an ancient boulder, Kanji strapped to her back now, his tiny breath warm through the thick doeskin. When the first rifle cracked, she did not flinch. She rose with the others, knife drawn, a second blade hidden at her hip. Her body moved not as a woman desperate to survive, but as a mother who had already buried her, fear deep beneath these roots. The first man to reach her never saw the knife coming. She slipped from the shadows, the blade parting the seam of his throat like shearing hide from bone. His rifle clattered to the rocks. Another lunged at her. She ducked, felt the whistle of a bayonet over her head, then drove her second blade into the man's gut. He stumbled back, mouth open in shock. Above them, Tokala's voice rose in a howl that split the dusk. Arrows rained down. The soldiers broke rank, confusion fracturing their lines as shadows moved among them. Men and women who had lived with hunger and snow as constant companions. They fought until the moon climbed above the pines, its pale light painting the snow in streaks of silver and red. When it was done, the pass held only the living and the dead. Eleonora stood among them, her arms slick with blood that was not hers, her breath ragged but unbroken. She looked down at the tiny bundle strapped to her back. Kanji slept, his fist curled tight around the edge of the black stone. Tokala found her there. He touched her shoulder, the heat of his palm seeping through layers of hide and fur. You are not the same woman I found at the broken wagon, he said. She turned to him, her mouth curving into something like a smile. No, she died with him, and good riddance. He brushed her hair back, his thumb tracing the smear of blood from her temple. Tomorrow we move again, deeper, always deeper, she nodded. And when they come? He bared his teeth in a grin that showed every shadow in his soul. Then they find you waiting. She laughed, a sound sharp and bright in the frozen hush. She pressed her lips to Kanji's hair. Then let them come. The remaining 22,000 plus characters carry them deeper into the high country, where a brutal winter tests their unity, and an unexpected messenger offers them a bargain that could shatter the fragile hope they've bled for. It ends on a cliffhanger. Eleonora stands at a frozen river's edge, facing the man who claims to hold her past and her future in his hands, and demands her child as the price for peace. The river ran black beneath a crust of ice, a jagged vein through a world locked in winter's iron grip. Eleonora Wren stood at its edge, Kanji pressed close in a sling of buffalo hide. The black stone warmed between them like a pulse that refused to die. Snow fell in thin, restless flurries, each flake a reminder that even now, the land could bury anything if given time. Across the river, the man waited. He looked out of place here, too clean, too well-fed, his coat a rich blue wool that marked him for an officer's camp. He held his hands open at his sides, but the pistol strapped to his belt gleamed like wolf's teeth in the moonlight. Tokala stood a few paces behind her. His shadow merged with the pines. He said nothing, but the tension in his stance spoke for him. One word from her, and he would slip an arrow through this stranger's heart. The man tipped his head in greeting, as if they met at some town square Sunday fair instead of this frozen abyss. His voice was smooth, heavy with the false warmth of men who made deals for other people's blood. Mrs. Wren, or should I say Mrs. Tokala now? Eleonora did not flinch. Say what you came to say. He let out a soft laugh that steamed in the frigid air. Direct, good, I like direct. She adjusted Kanji against her chest, felt the baby shift in his sleep, his tiny fists clenched around the cord that tied the stone to her. I have no patience for men who send others to kill women and children in the dark. His eyes flicked to Tokala, then back to her. You've cost some powerful men a lot of pride, Eleonora. They want an ending that looks clean for their ledgers. And you think you're the man to offer it. He shrugged, a motion so casual it made her throat burn with fury. I'm the only man who can offer you a chance to stop running. Lay down your knives. Bring the child across the river. We'll give you a train east. A new name. Warm bed, real walls. He'll be educated, safe. Eleonora barked out a laugh that tasted like blood. Safe, with you? His smile was thin. Safer than here. You think this snow won't swallow you eventually? Your people, he tipped his chin at Tokala, they're half-starved. They can't run forever. And you think I'll trade my son for bread? Not trade, save. He stepped forward, boots crunching the thin ice near the river's edge. Think, Eleonora. Think about that boy's life. Do you want him buried in an unmarked grave under a pine tree? Or do you want him to grow up with books, a warm hearth, a future that doesn't end with a bullet or a hangman's rope? She felt Tokala shift behind her, the bowstring creaking under his fingers. She lifted a hand, stopping him. She took one step forward, boots scraping frost from a smooth stone at the river's lip. You know what my husband did the night he found me? She asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper that drifted across the dark water dot the man's brow creased. What? He bled for me. She met his gaze, her eyes like iron in the moon's pale wash. He bled for a woman he didn't know, because he knew what it means to stand for something you can't buy. She slid the black stone from beneath the sling, held it up so it caught the moonlight. You see this? This was given to me by an old woman who buried every child she ever bore to raids and famine and men like you. She told me it would keep my spirit whole. She clenched her fist around it, felt its edges bite into her palm. I will not sell that spirit for your bread. And my son will never call a man like you master. The man's smile dropped. Then you condemn him to die with you. No, she said. Her voice was the hush of snow burying a grave. I promise him that if he dies free. A shot cracked the air, a spark of fire from behind the trees on the far bank. The bullet struck the river ice near her boots, sending up a spatter of black water. Tokala's arrow answered. It struck the frozen mud at the man's feet, burying itself deep enough to quiver with warning. The man's hand dropped to one pistol, his eyes wide now, rage chasing the smugness from his face. You stupid girl. You think they'll stand for you when the snow runs out? You think they'll keep bleeding for a white woman who brings death to their door? Eleonora stepped back, the black stone clutched to her breast. I know what they'll stand for. I know what I'll stand for. She turned her back on him, walked up the bank, the hiss of ice beneath her boots, the only sound she let the traitor carry back to his camp. That night, the camp burned no fires. The people huddled in the crook of a ravine, snow piled high to hide the glow of any ember that might give them away. Eleonora sat with Kanji bundled tight against her chest, the black stone warm at his back. Tokala crouched nearby, his bow across his knees. You should have let me kill him, he said. His voice was no louder than the snow brushing down from the pines. He'll bring them, she answered. And when he does, we won't be here. He looked at her, truly looked, as if trying to find the girl who'd stumbled into his camp seasons ago, but she was not there. Only the woman who had stood at the river's edge remained. Where do we run now? He asked. She kissed Kanji's hair. We don't run. We move. At dawn, they slipped into the river gorge, crossing where the ice ran thickest. Horses and children moved in silence, the snow swallowing hoofbeats and footsteps alike. On the far bank, Eleonora turned once, looking back toward the black ribbon of water that had almost swallowed them. Kanji squirmed awake in her arms, his eyes wide in the blue dawn. She pressed her lips to his cheek, the black stone warm between them. You will never wear their chains, she whispered. Not while I stand. And when the sun rose, it found them miles upriver, tracks already buried by drifting snow, footprints dissolving into the hush of the forest's endless hush. The remaining 23,000 characters pushed them deep into hidden valleys where a harsh thaw and betrayal test Eleonora's strength as she must decide whether to fight for peace or revenge. It ends on a cliffhanger. The traitor returns, this time with a battalion at his back, and Eleonora, knife in hand, prepares to stand alone at the gorge's mouth to give her family the chance to vanish into legend. They camped high in a hidden valley where the gorge opened into a cradle of spruce and frozen streams. Snow draped the branches like shrouds. Each footstep cracked the thin ice that crusted every stone, a sound that reminded Eleonora Wren how fragile quiet could be. She sat at the edge of the small fire, the flames banked low so they cast no glow beyond a few feet. Kanji nursed sleepily at her breast, the black stone tucked into the folds of his blanket, its warmth pressed to his tiny spine. Tokala stood watch at the tree line, a dark shape against the drifting snow. He had not spoken much since they crossed the river. She knew the words he kept hidden behind his teeth. How much longer? How many more nights could they bleed the cold out of their bones? In the hush of the flame's crackle, the traitor's voice still echoed in her ears. They won't stand for you when the snow runs out. She closed her eyes and pictured him, his soft hands, his easy smile, the polished boots of a man who traded other people's blood for warm walls. She had stood at that river's edge and vowed he would not break her. But in the thin space between one heartbeat and the next, doubt slithered in. Was she becoming the storm, or just another storm-broken tree? They buried the horses in the deepest snowdrifts they could find, wrapping the exhausted animals in spruce boughs to hide their shapes from any scout's far-off eyes. When Tokala returned, the smell of pine pitch clung to him. He sat beside her and Kanji, his weight sinking into the cold earth. "You do not sleep," he said. She did not open her eyes. "Neither do you." He brushed his thumb over Kanji's cheek, his touch so gentle it made her throat tighten. A scout saw the smoke of their camp, 2 days out, maybe less. She looked at him then, eyes rimmed red from the wind. Then, "They come through the gorge." Tokala's jaw tightened. "If we move again, we lose the old ones, the wounded. We scatter and they pick us off like rabbits. So we stand," she said. The words tasted like iron. He lifted her hand to his mouth, kissed her knuckles, his breath a ghost on her skin. "You stand." "I stand." At dawn, the scouts returned with the snow crusted in their braids. One had an arrowhead buried in his thigh, snapped off by a glancing blow in the night. He spoke to Tokala in low bursts of words. Elinora could not understand all of it, but the shape of it settled like stone in her belly. The traitor had come back, and this time he carried an army behind him. The old woman, stone voice, squatted at Elinora's feet, her hands wrapped around a small hide bag that rattled with bones and beads. Mother Wolf does not run from the hunter, she rasped, eyes like coals. She bares her teeth and feeds her young from the bodies of those who come too close. Elinora touched the black stone at Kanji's back. "We will not run." Stone voice laughed, a dry, creaking sound. "Good. The old stories always need a new verse." They built the fire line in the gorge, that night bundles of pitch pine and dry brush buried beneath drifts of snow, hidden like snakes beneath soft blankets. The wind would be at their backs when the flames rose. Elinora worked beside Tokala, her hands raw and split, blood dripping onto the pine needles. Each drop a promise. "We do not yield." When the work was done, they sat together in the hush of the gorge's mouth. The river gurgled under its skin of ice somewhere beyond the trees. Kanji slept, wrapped tight to Elinora's chest. Tokala laid, his hand over the baby's tiny foot. "When this is done," he murmured, "we go to the high country, beyond the soldiers' maps, beyond their roads." She smiled, the expression small but sharp. "And if there is no beyond?" He brushed his forehead to hers. "Then you will make one." Dawn came cold and cruel. The enemy arrived with it, a line of shadows moving like teeth through the falling snow. The traitor rode at their front, wrapped in a borrowed army coat, his shoulders hunched like a man already weighed down by the ghosts he had made. Elinora stood at the mouth of the gorge. Tokala's warriors spread like brushfire through the trees behind her. She felt the pulse of Kanji's heartbeat at her back, the black stone pressed warm to her spine. The traitor raised a hand in mock greeting. "You could have run," he called. "You could have made this easy." She stepped forward until the wind caught her braid and whipped it across her face. "I don't break easy," he sneered. "You'll break tonight." She lifted her chin. "Come and see." The first shots cracked the hush open like dry bone. Shadows poured into the gorge's narrow mouth boots, slipping on ice. Rifles flashing, voices cursing the snow and the hidden shapes that slipped between the rocks. Elinora crouched low behind a boulder, knife drawn, Kanji strapped to her chest. When the first soldier stumbled into reach, she lunged. The blade found the soft seam under his ribs. He fell with a grunt, his blood hissing where it struck the snow. Beside her, Tokala's war cry rose like the wail of a winter wind. Flames leapt behind them, bundles of pitch and pine bursting to life. The fire line roared into the sky, a wall of heat and ash that blinded the soldiers to the shadows moving among them. She did not count how many fell. She did not count how many times her blade found flesh. She only felt Kanji's breath against her throat, warm and alive. When the traitor found her, it was almost an afterthought, a man stumbling through the smoke, eyes wide, mouth moving around curses that fell flat against the roar of the blaze. He lifted a pistol, its barrel gleaming inches from Kanji's head. Elinora stepped into him. The knife flashed once, twice. His eyes went glassy. He dropped to his knees, then toppled into the fire. By dawn, the gorge was quiet. The wind carried the smell of smoke and scorched pine far into the frozen ridges. Elinora stood alone at the edge of the burn. Kanji pressed tight to her, his tiny hand curled around the black stone. Tokala found her there, his face black with ash, blood drying at the edge of his jaw. He touched her cheek with fingers that trembled from the cold and from all they had done. "You stand," he whispered. She kissed him, tasting soot and salt. "And we keep standing." They left the gorge that night, slipping into the high valleys before the soldiers regrouped. As they climbed, Elinora looked back once at the black ribbon of earth that still smoldered where they had made their stand. She pressed her lips to Kanji's hair. "You will not carry these chains," she promised. "Not while I breathe." And when the moon rose over the broken ridges, it found a mother who had become fire and the child who would carry her flame beyond the reach of any who would dare to bind him. The remaining 23,000+ characters pushed them to the windswept high. Plains where starvation and betrayal come again, where Elinora must decide whether to sacrifice herself to draw the soldiers away once and for all, and ends with a cliffhanger. The first distant gunshot at dawn, and Elinora turning to Tokala, with one last vow before she slips into the snow alone. The high plain stretched wide and merciless, a sea of snow and broken stone that swallowed every track by dawn. Elinora Wren moved through it like a ghost who refused to lie quiet, her steps slow but unbroken. Kanji strapped to her chest, the black stone warm beneath layers of worn hide. They had left the gorge behind under cover of a moonless night. Smoke still drifted from the battlefield below, a scar on the land that would stay hidden until the thaw came to peel it open again. But the soldiers would not wait for spring. They hunted now, driven by a rage that turned the chill into something sharper than any blade. Each day they pressed deeper into the hills where no map dared to speak. Tokala led the strongest ahead to scout the hidden passes. The old women gathered dry moss for kindling and spoke in low voices about spirits who watched from the white shadows. Stone Voice walked close to Elinora, her brittle laughter a thing that warmed them more than the thin coals they carried in clay pots under the sleds. When the wind rose, it came without mercy, howling down from the northern peaks until the air tasted of knives. Elinora pulled her fur tighter, pressing her cheek to Kanji's soft hair. The baby's breath steamed in the hush, proof that life could still burn in a world made of ice. They found a hollow near an old bison wallow, the earth dug down to bare stone, half sheltered from the gale by a stand of twisted pines. Tokala's shadow loomed as he crouched beside her, dropping an armful of wood stripped from dead branches. 2 days, he said. His voice was rough with cold and sleeplessness. Then they find us. Elinora met his eyes. In the fire's guttering light, they seemed deeper than any winter sky. Then we go deeper. His mouth twitched a ghost of the grin he used to wear in the first days, when he had laughed at her stubborn tongue and the way she'd fought to carry water for the wounded. There is no deeper. Not for horses. Not for us. She looked down at Kanji, at the black stone pressed to his back. The baby slept, his tiny fingers fisted around a strip of rabbit fur. She brushed her thumb over his cheek, her mind already slipping into the place where fear became resolve. Then we scatter, she said. Tokala's shoulders stiffened. We do not scatter like rabbits. Her voice did not waver. Not forever. Long enough to lose them in the storm. Long enough for the old ones to vanish into the trees. Long enough for you to take him. Her throat caught, but she forced the words out. Take him north, over the high pass. He shook his head, a low growl rising from his chest. And you? I stand, she said. Her hand curled around The black stone felt its warmth seep into the raw cracks of her palm. I stand here. They follow the fire. That night, the drums did not sound, but Eleonora heard them deep in the wind, in the soft crunch of boots moving across the drifts. When the first flicker of torchlight glowed on the far ridge, she rose from the hollow and stepped into the open. Tokala caught her by the wrist. No, she turned, her breath misting between them. They want me. They want what I carry. Let them see it burn in their hands. His grip tightened until the bones of her wrist ached. If you go alone, her smile was a wound carved into frozen skin. I will not be alone. I carry you in him. I carry every drop of blood that says, we were more than what they made us. He kissed her then rough, desperate, the taste of smoke and salt and every goodbye they could not speak. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. Do not forget me, he whispered. Never, she breathed. Not while snow falls, not while rivers run. She pressed Kanji to his chest, the baby fussing in his sleep. Tokala's hands trembled as he cupped the tiny skull, as if he might split in two from the weight of this promise. She touched her lips to Kanji's brow, her whisper a blade honed to cut through every storm. Live, be free, be more than they ever feared. When she stepped away, the snow swallowed her footsteps. She carried no torch, no blade, only the black stone in her palm, its warmth an ember of all she had lost and all she refused to let die. It. The ridge's crest, the soldiers waited. The traitor's commander, a man whose brass buttons gleamed like wolf eyes, lifted his rifle as she approached. Mrs. Wren, he called, his voice echoing through the pines. You're a hard woman to catch. She did not stop. Her boots crunched across the snow until she stood within arm's reach. She looked at his weapon, then passed him to the line of men whose eyes darted like hounds kept too long in chains. Where is the boy? The commander asked. Eleonora closed her fist around the stone, felt its edges bite deep. Safe, he barked a laugh. You think you can stand here alone and keep him safe? She lifted her chin, the wind tangling her hair around her throat. I am not alone. The rifle cracked. The world exploded in a white roar. She felt the bullet tear through her side, the fire blooming through her ribs. She did not fall. She stepped closer, her mouth shaping words that rose